Welcome to the deep dive. We take your sources, could be articles, research, our own notes, and we really try to unearth the most potent insights, giving you that well-informed edge.
That's the goal.
Today, we're embarking on lesson 2 of our journey. And honestly, this is a truly mind-blowing and profoundly practical deep dive. We're centering on the incredible story of the burning bush, from Exodus chapters 3 and 4.
A classic story.
Right, you might think you know this narrative, but we're going to dig deep, really deep, to uncover powerful, practical lessons for your daily living. Lessons that I think could fundamentally reshape how you understand God's character and maybe your own potential when faced with his call.
Indeed. And this isn't just, ancient history we're dusting off. This deep dive into the divine command given to Moses at the burning bush, it's like a timeless blueprint.
A blueprint. How so?
Well, for understanding God's character, his methods of preparation, which are often surprising, and his unwavering commitment to those he calls, even or maybe especially those who feel profoundly inadequate.
Okay, I like that. So what are we hitting specifically?
We'll intensely explore why Moses, despite his grand Egyptian past, apparently needed 80 years,
Yeah,
80 of solitude, and frankly, humble work before God seemed to deem him truly ready.
80 years. That speaks volumes about patience, doesn't it? We have to unpack.
We absolutely do. And we'll peel back the layers of what God's self-revealed name, I Am, truly signifies about his eternal presence and his intimate relationship with us.
Crucial stuff.
And importantly, we'll examine how even our most, let's say, reasonable excuses when we're faced with a divine imperative often reveal a deeper distrust. A distrust that God patiently, powerfully, and sometimes, with divine displeasure addresses.
Okay, so patience, but also holy frustration sometimes.
Exactly. And we won't shy away from the challenging parts either.
Good. Like what?
Like why God chose a humble shepherd, the profound significance of his self-revelation as the God of the covenant, and we'll even delve into that strange, almost alarming incident later on.
The circumcision story.
That's the one. It holds vital lessons for every one of us today about the absolute importance of complete and immediate obedience to God's known will.
Wow. Okay, so get ready then, listener, to maybe rethink what you know about God's calling and your own capacity to answer it. Because this story, it's far more dynamic, more challenging, and more applicable to your life right now than you might ever have realized.
Let's dive in. The making of a leader. Moses' 80-year wilderness university.
Okay, let's unpack this extraordinary journey into Moses' life, leading up to that pivotal, life-altering moment at the burning bush. We often picture him as this grand, almost mythical figure.
Born ready.
Yeah, born ready to lead, a natural deliverer. But our sources, they clearly show a radically different picture. He certainly wasn't born ready for the monumental role God had in mind.
Not at all.
His life, in fact, was explicitly split into 3 distinct 40-year segments. It's like God works in these long arcs, doesn't he?
Absolutely. And each segment seems to build, or like you said, unbuild him for the next. It's a powerful testament to divine timing and, deep preparation.
Unbuilding, I like that.
Yeah.
So talk about the contrast, the first 40 years versus the next 40.
Right. Our sources reveal a remarkable, almost jarring contrast. His initial 4 decades spent at the absolute pinnacle of Egyptian society.
Top of the world, basically.
Pretty much. Educated as a king's grandson, living in Pharaoh's own household, maybe even a prospective heir to the throne, he received the highest civil and military training available anywhere in the ancient world.
So this wasn't just like a good school.
No, this was an immersion in power, in strategy, and self-sufficiency.
Yeah.
And the result, he felt fully prepared, maybe even divinely appointed in his own mind, to deliver Israel by his own power and wisdom.
Which led to him
Rashly killing an Egyptian.
Right.
That act wasn't heroism. It reveals this impetuous spirit someone used to praise, maybe flattery, a man who genuinely believed he could accomplish God's work through his own strength, his Egyptian training, his royal connections.
A real go-getter, but maybe relying on the wrong things.
Exactly. He was a military leader, a general, someone who made things happen his way on his timeline.
So if he was this highly educated, self-confident prince, used to the best, used to being in charge, what did God do with him?
Not what you'd expect.
Not at all. He didn't send him to another palace or give him an army. Nope. He sent him to a desolate desert wilderness for another 40 years.
40 more years.
40 more years
Yeah.
to be a humble keeper of sheep.
Oh, wow. That's not exactly the career path you'd chart for a future deliverer of millions, is it? Talk about a demotion.
It's a stark, almost unimaginable shift from palace halls to, parched, lonely
So
pastures.
what was God doing? What a profound lessons was he trying to forge in that barren landscape? And that question about patience.
Yeah.
80 years total before the big call. What does that teach us?
Well, that's precisely the fascinating point our sources highlight. God judged Moses' true readiness very differently from how Moses judged himself, or how, frankly, the world might judge readiness.
While that Egyptian education was certainly helpful, gave him administrative, strategic skills he'd use later, sure, the most valuable preparation, it came not from the academy, but from the shepherd's life.
In the middle of nowhere.
Right. In the quiet, remote wilds of Midian, leading flocks through tough mountains, rugged valleys, facing storms, patiently searching for lost lambs, nursing sick ewes.
Real, hands-on, gritty work.
Exactly. And through that, Moses learned lessons absolutely crucial for God's representative. This wasn't just physical labor, it was a daily masterclass in humility, meekness, patience, resilience, and maybe most importantly, self-forgetfulness.
Learning to care for the weak, the vulnerable.
Precisely. He learned to care for the weak, nurse the sick, seek the straying, bear with the unruly members of his flock. That's a radical transformation from an impatient, self-sufficient military leader to a tender, compassionate shepherd.
Hmm.
And in this very work, Moses was drawn nearer to the chief shepherd, wasn't he? Recognizing God's presence in nature, in the intricate care needed for each creature.
So he stopped planning his own great work.
It seems so. He ceased planning to do a great work by his own might, and instead sought to faithfully do the humble work committed to his charge as unto God. This period was about unlearning self-sufficiency.
Like hitting reset.
Totally. Stripping away that reliance on Egyptian might to create space for divine meekness. It's a bit like the Apostle Paul having to unlearn his own achievements and pedigree in Arabia before he could truly serve God.
That's a great parallel.
And it really challenges our modern obsession with, immediate results, instant gratification. Sometimes the most potent growth happens in those quiet seasons of humble faithfulness that the world just completely overlooks.
God's timing isn't our timing.
Definitely not. And true readiness often looks entirely different from what we expect. That 80-year wait teaches us profound patience is often required for God's deepest work in us.
And it wasn't just, tending sheep physically, was it? Our sources mention he was doing some pretty profound intellectual and spiritual work during these quiet years, too.
Indeed. That's a critical point. This seemingly forgotten period, far from being unproductive, was incredibly fruitful and spiritually formative.
How so?
Under direct divine inspiration, Moses wrote 2 foundational biblical books, Job and Genesis.
Wow. Genesis. During the shepherd years.
Imagine that. Before he was called to be this great national leader, he was laying the intellectual, spiritual, and historical groundwork for understanding sacred history and the entire plan of salvation.
So getting insights into
the great controversy, that cosmic conflict between good and evil, Christ and Satan, that underpins everything. He wrote about creation, the fall, the flood, the patriarchs. This work is so vital that, honestly, biblical and salvation history make little sense without it, especially Genesis.
That has huge implications for how we view Genesis today.
Absolutely. And it teaches us a powerful truth for our daily lives, too. Our duties, even the quiet, seemingly insignificant, humble ones, they can be deeply aligned with God's will. They can be his precise, deliberate preparation for future tasks.
So our work, whatever it is,
Exactly. Whether it's raising a family, caring for others, doing our job diligently, it can and should be faithfully done as unto God, because it's in those quiet, consistent efforts that character is formed, and divine insights are often given.
So Moses' 80-year preparation, it really teaches us about divine timing, the patience needed for God to deem us truly ready, sanding off those rough edges of self-reliance.
Molding our character for his use, it's a profound lesson in waiting and trusting God's process. 2, the burning bush, a call that transforms.
Okay, so after 40 years of this quiet, character-forming preparation, 40 years in the desert, basically living a life completely opposite to his Egyptian upbringing, God breaks through
Dramatic.
with this extraordinary, undeniable intervention, the burning bush. So what was so captivating about this sight? What made Moses, this settled shepherd now, turn aside?
Well, this was clearly no ordinary desert phenomenon. Moses, as a seasoned shepherd, would have known that instantly.
Right, he'd seen plenty of desert fires, presumably.
Exactly. He saw a bush burning intensely with fire, yet miraculously, it wasn't consumed. It wasn't turning to ash. That caught his attention as a clear miracle, a physical impossibility, a sign that something dramatic, something profoundly important was unfolding right there.
Demanding his attention.
Absolutely. And as he turned aside to look, drawn by this, irresistible curiosity, a command comes from the heart of the flame. Draw not nigh hither. Put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground.
Taking off shoes. A sign of reverence.
A universal sign of deep reverence in the ancient Near East, yeah. Acknowledging that God's holy presence makes any ground sacred, set apart, and it underscores a profound truth. We can't just barge into God's presence on our own terms.
There's a necessary respect, a humility.
Precisely. Our reason, our intellect has to acknowledge an authority superior to itself. Heart and intellect must bow before the great I am. It's actually a proof of God's mercy that his full power and glory are often veiled.
Because we couldn't handle it otherwise.
No mortal mind could fully penetrate the secrecy in which the Mighty One dwells without being destroyed. So this initial command wasn't just a keep back, but more like a gracious invitation approach, yes, but with the humility and reverence fitting for encountering the divine.
Okay, and the voice itself. Our sources clarify it wasn't just, any voice from the bush, not God the Father directly.
This is where it gets profoundly significant, revealing how God interacts with humanity. While the text explicitly says the angel of the Lord,
Which just means messenger, right?
exactly,
Yeah.
Malach in Hebrew, our sources clearly state this was none other than the pre-incarnate Lord Jesus himself speaking to Moses.
Jesus. Before Bethlehem.
Yes, this angel of the Lord figure appears throughout the Old Testament and is consistently presented as a divine person, the Lord himself, God's messenger sent to communicate the Father's word and enact his will. This was an appearance of the Messiah, Jesus Christ, before he took on human flesh.
What does that tell us?
It shows God is intimately involved in human affairs, directly intervening to reveal his will, to initiate his plan of deliverance. And think about the impact on Moses.
After 40 years in the desert,
Those magnificent Egyptian temples, the false gods, the grand ceremonies, the imposing statues, they probably seem pretty hollow after this. In the solemn grandeur of Horeb, facing this unconsumed fire, hearing the voice of the divine messenger, nature itself spoke of the unseen eternal one.
and his bride.
Swept away. That pride cultivated in Pharaoh's court, replaced by genuine meekness and humility. This personal, direct encounter with Jesus Christ dramatically altered Moses' life. It laid the foundation for everything that followed.
Not just a voice, but a divine self-revelation.
Exactly, transforming him at his very core. 3, the covenant-keeping God, unveiling his character and purpose.
Wow. What an incredible, truly awe-inspiring moment.
Yeah.
God appearing in a burning bush, revealing himself through Jesus, the divine messenger. And then he immediately introduces himself.
Right.
With a name, or rather a description, that carries immense eternal significance. It connects directly to a long-standing promise.
Hmm.
What was that name, and why did Moses and the Israelites need to hear it right then?
He introduced himself as the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob.
The patriarchs?
Exactly. The significance is profound because it immediately linked his present dramatic action to his past solemn promises. He'd made a covenant, a sacred binding agreement with these patriarchs centuries earlier.
Promising them the land, descendants.
Right. Promising their descendants would become a great nation and inherit Canaan. Moses knew these stories, these promises, so God was showing him unequivocally that he is utterly reliable, trustworthy, and would unfailingly fulfill his word, even after 400 years of, frankly, silence and brutal oppression.
So this wasn't some new God appearing out of nowhere.
Not at all. This was the very same faithful God who had always remembered his covenant, who never forgot his people. And think about the significance of him identifying himself that way. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What does that tell us?
It means his promises last, right? They span generations, millennia even.
Precisely. His character is unchanging. His word is immutable. This deep connection to his covenant history was absolutely essential to strengthen Moses' own faith and give him an authoritative message for the skeptical Israelites back in Egypt. It reminded them of their heritage, of God's enduring faithfulness.
So a God who remembers his promises, his sworn commitments, even when his people were suffering terribly and maybe feel forgotten.
Exactly.
And beyond just remembering, how did he explain why he wanted to intervene? What did that reveal about his heart, his feelings about their suffering?
He explained it with such profound personal compassion, it's almost like a lament. He says, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. He knows their sorrows. That's powerful.
It really is. God's motivation wasn't abstract justice or some distant decree. It was direct, personal, empathetic concern. He called them my people, even before the formal covenant at Sinai was ratified, affirming their relationship with him despite how far they might have strayed in Egypt.
That's his plan.
He declared with divine resolve, I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land unto a good land and a large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey.
So deliverance and a destination.
Right. It reveals God's ultimate purpose. Separate his people from the world's ways, bring them near to himself, and make his will and character known through their transformed lives. That's the essence of his intervention. He sees, he hears, he knows, and then profoundly, intimately, he acts.
That has huge implications for us today, doesn't it? Absolutely. It provides a powerful daily living lesson for you, the listener. When you cry out in discouragement, guilt, shame, deep pain, overwhelming anxiety, God truly sees, hears, and knows your suffering. And his knowing here, our sources suggest it isn't just intellectual awareness, it's almost an experiential knowledge.
Like, he feels it with us.
As if he feels the whip alongside them. This profound empathy fundamentally redefines his sovereignty. It's not detached control, it's a shared burden. He's an approachable, close, personal God who intimately enters into our suffering. It suggests even our brokenness is somehow integrated into his redemptive plan.
Okay, so Moses then asks about God's name. And you said this goes deeper than just wanting a label. Why did he ask that?
That's a crucial point. Moses asked, what is his name? This wasn't a simple request for a tag. It was a query for deeper meaning, for revelation of his character, because the people, after generations in Egypt, didn't truly know God personally in the way they should. His true nature, his power, had faded in their collective memory.
They needed something to grasp onto.
Exactly. And God's direct self-revelatory response was, I am that I am, in Hebrew. Eheja Asher Eheja, which can also be rendered, I will be who I will be.
What does that signify?
It signifies his eternal, self-existent presence and absolute independence. Past, present, future, they're all alike to him, contained within him. He's the transcendent God, utterly beyond our full comprehension, existing outside time and space, the uncaused cause.
So it's totally other.
Yes, but also, he's the immanent God, the one who dwells with the contrite and humble. He's inherently present, actively intervening, and fundamentally cannot be manipulated or controlled by human schemes or limitations. He's utterly self-sufficient and eternally reliable. His very existence is his promise.
Wow. And our sources also highlight two other key names, Yahweh and Elohim, used throughout Scripture. How do they add to this understanding?
Right. They often appear together, and the interplay is important. Yahweh, usually translated as the Lord in our English Bibles, was known before, but not in its deeper experiential meaning until this time. Yahweh points to God as the personal God, the God of his people, the God of the covenant. A close, intimate God who intervenes directly in human affairs, demonstrating his moral power through profound love and diligent care for his chosen ones. He's the almighty God who miraculously acts for his people.
A relational God.
Exactly. Then you have Elohim, used right back in Genesis 1.1. This signifies the mighty, strong, transcendent God, the ruler of the universe, the creator of everything.
The power aspect.
Right. And what's fascinating linguistically is that Elohim is a plural noun often used with a singular verb, which many see as hinting at the complexity of the Godhead 3 in 1, yet united in purpose and action.
Interesting.
Understanding these names together gives a fuller picture. It's not just semantics, it's theology. God is both intimately near, Yahweh, and infinitely powerful and transcendent, Elohim.
So knowing these names isn't like magic.
No, not at all. It's about proclaiming his truth, the reality of who he is, and the boundless salvation he offers through faith. Experiencing Yahweh means realizing his closeness and intimacy in your own life, recognizing his constant presence, his power to redeem and restore. It's understanding his moral power, his love, his care are active in your journey. So the question for you, listener, is, in what ways have you experienced that closeness, that intimacy with Yahweh that he seeks with all who surrender to him? It's meant to be lived, not just known intellectually. 4. The dialogue of excuses, God's patience, and our reluctance.
Okay, here's where Moses starts to sound, well, a lot like us, doesn't he?
Very relatable.
Despite this incredible, personal, awe-inspiring revelation right there from the presence of God, he immediately starts making excuses, pushing back against this admittedly overwhelming task. What was his very first one?
His first response straight out of the gate was, "Who am I that I should go into Pharaoh?"
Who am I? Classic.
Classic. And this wasn't just, genuine humility, though maybe there was an element of that. It seems more a deep-seated sense of his own unworthiness and incapacity, probably remembering his past disastrous attempt at deliverance, right?
And he killed the Egyptian and had to flee.
Yeah. So it's a very human response when you're faced with something enormous, seemingly impossible, that just dwarfs your capabilities. You feel totally inadequate. Why is humility and a sense of our own unworthiness so important for anyone who seeks to follow the Lord? Maybe because it forces reliance on him.
Makes sense. So how did God respond to that first, who am I?
God's immediate and honestly all-encompassing promise, which should have been enough, was simply, "Certainly I will be with thee."
I will be with thee, the Emmanuel promise.
Exactly. God with us. That's the greatest assurance anyone could ever need. When God, the great I Am, the Elohim of the universe, says he's with you, what else could you possibly need? If grasped, that promise should surpass all our excuses, all our feelings of inadequacy.
It shifts the focus entirely. From my ability to his presence. But that wasn't enough for Moses, was it? Even with that promise, he moved on. His next concern was about the people.
Right. The enslaved Israelites. His third objection, after God's huge promise, was basically, what if they do not believe me or listen to my voice?
Which again seems reasonable on the surface. He'd tried before.
He had. He knew they'd scorned him 40 years earlier, saying, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us?" He had reason to doubt their reception.
So how did God address that concern? Did he just say, trust me?
He did more than that. He responded by giving Moses 3 powerful, tangible, and deeply symbolic signs to perform. Miracles.
What were they?
First, his shepherd's staff turning into a serpent and back again. Second, his hand becoming leprous and then instantly healed. And third, taking water from the Nile and turning it into blood on the ground.
Wow. Not just random magic tricks, I assume.
No, absolutely not. Each sign was deeply symbolic and directly challenged the powers and the false gods of Egypt.
How so? The serpent.
The serpent, specifically the cobra, was a symbol of Egyptian power, royalty. Pharaoh's authority often worn right on his crown, the uraeus. Transforming a simple staff into a living serpent and back showed God's supremacy over their gods, over Pharaoh himself.
Okay. And the leprosy.
Leprosy was a dreaded, often incurable disease in Egypt, sometimes seen as divine punishment. Its instantaneous healing demonstrated God's power to make clean, to bring life where there was decay, a power no Egyptian god or physician possessed.
And the water to blood? That seems pretty direct.
Very direct. It challenged the Nile River itself, Egypt's life source, which they deified with various river gods. Turning its water to blood proved God's sovereignty even over their most fundamental elements, their economy, their deities.
So these signs weren't about Moses' power.
Not at all. They were evidence not of Moses' might or his eloquence, but of God's supreme presence and power working through him. They were designed to convince both the skeptical Israelites and the hardened Egyptians that the God of Abraham was truly acting.
Powerful stuff. But Moses still wasn't convinced, was he? Then came the classic I can't speak excuse.
Yep. The one so many of us can relate to. That feeling of inadequacy, that inner voice saying you're not articulate enough, not smooth enough, not prepared enough.
The perennial excuse. What did he actually say?
He pleaded, "Oh my Lord, I am not eloquent. I am slow of speech and of a slow tongue." After 40 years away from the sophisticated Egyptian courts, maybe his fluency in Egyptian had faded. Or perhaps he genuinely had some kind of speech impediment.
And in Egypt, eloquence was a big deal for leaders.
Right. Huge. Pharaoh's court would have been filled with skilled orators. So Moses' admission wasn't just a minor inconvenience in his mind, it was a profound disqualification. How could he represent God effectively to a powerful empire if he couldn't speak well?
Makes sense from a human perspective. How did God respond? Was he sympathetic?
God's response was powerful and direct, cutting right to the heart of it. He basically rebuked him, saying, "Who hath made man's mouth? Or who maketh the dumb, or deaf, or the seeing, or the blind? Have not I the Lord?"
Wow. Putting it back on the Creator.
Exactly. Then he says, "Now therefore go, and I will be with thy mouth, and teach thee what thou shalt say." It reminds you of Jeremiah, doesn't it? His similar excuse.
Yeah.
It highlights this profound truth we absolutely must grasp. God doesn't just call the qualified, he qualifies those he calls.
Say that again.
God doesn't just call the qualified, he qualifies those he calls. He's the creator, the giver of all abilities. And he often delights in using our perceived weaknesses to showcase his own limitless power.
So the glory goes to him, not us.
Precisely. He empowers us for the tasks he assigns.
Okay, so direct promise of presence, miraculous signs, promise to enable his speech. Surely that was enough.
You'd think so. But even with all these direct assurances, Moses still resisted.
No.
He pushed back one last time, a fifth and final desperate plea. It's almost shocking, really. He's practically commanding God.
What did he say?
He said, "O my Lord, send, I pray thee, by the hand of him whom thou wilt send." Basically, please send someone else, anyone else.
Wow. Moving from questioning to outright refusal.
Exactly. He's essentially trying to tell God what to do, suggesting God made a mistake in choosing him. And this time, the text says, the Lord's anger burned against Moses.
God got angry.
Yes, a moment of deep displeasure. It shows God's seriousness, his expectation of trust and obedience after everything he'd revealed and promised. This wasn't, a human losing his temper. It was holy indignation at Moses' persistent distrust and defiance.
Understandable. So did God give up on him?
No. And this is amazing. God, in his magnificent grace and really his foreknowledge, still provided a solution. He demonstrates his unwavering commitment to his plan despite our failings. He says basically, okay, what about your brother Aaron? He can speak well.
Yeah, right.
And guess what? He is already on his way to meet you. God, in his providence, had anticipated Moses' resistance and had already prepared Aaron to be his spokesperson, his mouth.
That's incredible foresight.
Isn't it? And it illustrates a vital practical lesson for you, the listener. While God invites dialogue, lets us voice our fears, when he assures us of his presence and gives his clear word, we must trust him and obey. But even when we're hesitant, even when we refuse, God often prepares a way. He provides the exact help, the resources, the support we need. He gives us all the promises. We just need to count on him and step forward. So how does the Lord respond to Moses? He responds with provision, even in anger. That teaches us God provides what we need, even if it's not how we imagined it. The deeper lesson of obedience, the circumcision story.
All right, let's shift gears a bit now. Let's turn to what our sources call a strange story. That incident in Exodus 4 with Moses' son and circumcision. It feels so sudden, almost jarring, coming right after this whole burning bush encounter and the back and forth with the excuses.
It really does stand out, doesn't it?
How do we understand this abrupt, life-threatening encounter? And what's the profound, maybe even uncomfortable lesson here for us today?
Yeah, this story, Exodus 4, verses 24 to 26, it truly shocks many Bible students because it depicts a direct, life-threatening confrontation initiated by God himself or his angel.
So what happened exactly?
As Moses was journeying back to Egypt, presumably filled with this divine commission, maybe feeling a bit more confident after the Aaron solution, an angel of the Lord meets him at a lodging place. And the text says the angel sought to kill him, assumed a threatening posture.
Wow. Kill him after just commissioning him. Why?
The issue, our sources clarify, was Moses' neglect of a positive, explicit command of God. His youngest son, Eleazar, hadn't been circumcised.
Circumcision, as required by the Abrahamic covenant.
Exactly. Established centuries earlier, back in Genesis 17. And apparently Zipporah, his Midianite wife, maybe realizing the cause of this divine threat, performed the circumcision right there, in haste, using a sharp stone, and basically saved Moses' life.
So why was this seeming small thing, this personal family oversight, why was it so incredibly serious that it literally threatened Moses' life at this absolutely critical moment? What made it such a grave offense in God's eyes?
Okay, the lesson here is multifaceted, and it's critically important, especially for anyone called to lead or represent God in any capacity.
Right.
First, think about it. As the chosen leader of God's people, Moses needed to show perfect submission and absolute obedience to God himself before he could lead others.
He had to be the model.
Exactly, a model of total surrender, qualified to lead others in obedience. His personal neglect of this known command, it would have gravely lessened the force and authority of God's laws on the very people he was supposed to lead. It makes him look like a hypocrite on a fundamental point.
How can you tell others to obey if you're not? Makes sense.
Second, there's a spiritual protection aspect. God's angels, his divine protectors, apparently couldn't fully shield Moses while he was living in known disobedience. His life wasn't secure because divine protection is intrinsically linked to faithfulness to God's revealed will.
So disobedience creates vulnerability.
It seems so. A spiritual principle. Disobedience can open us up to spiritual attack or remove a layer of divine protection. Third, this whole episode highlights the paramount importance of never failing to do what you know is right, even in the little things or things that seem purely private.
God cares about the details.
He's thorough, specific in what he reveals and expects. Moses needed to teach the congregation about circumcision as a sign of their covenant with God. What authority would he have if he hadn't obeyed this himself first? It signaled a dangerous casualness towards God's explicit commands.
Okay, that makes sense. Anything else? You said multifaceted.
Yes. Fourth, and this is perhaps the most profound theological point, circumcision wasn't just a ritual. It was intended as a visible sign, a seal of righteousness by faith.
Not a way to earn righteousness.
Exactly. Not a way to earn it, but a sign of it. It symbolized a complete dependence on God's promise and provision rather than on human effort, the flesh, or physical lineage. It signified a cutting away of self-reliance.
Oh.
So by neglecting it, Moses wasn't just overlooking some minor ritual requirement. He was, symbolically at least, undermining the very core theological principle of having a relationship with God based entirely on trusting him, rather than trusting in human ability or even just going through the motions of ritual.
That really deepens the significance. It wasn't just about the physical act.
Right. It speaks to us today about those maybe small acts of obedience that actually symbolize our total surrender and reliance on God's grace.
That is a powerful and, yeah, maybe uncomfortable truth for us today. It forces an examination of our own lives, doesn't it?
It should.
So what should this story say to you, the listener, if you realize, uh-oh, I'm neglecting something I know I should be doing? Maybe rationalizing away those small things. What changes might be needed, like right now?
Well, this story should definitely cause us to reflect deeply on any known duties we might be neglecting, any clear commands of God we're maybe rationalizing away or just postponing. If we are guilty of not doing what we know we should be doing, the implication is we need to make changes. Immediately.
No delay.
It emphasizes that God is just as particular, just as specific today about our obedience as he was then. We can't just water down God's commands or think adherence to them is optional or somehow less important than the bigger tasks he gives us.
It's all connected.
It is. Our obedience is the fruit of righteousness by faith. It doesn't earn it, but it is absolutely essential for maintaining God's blessings and divine protection. It demonstrates our trust.
Like that example you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, you see transformations in people, like a former gang member mentioned in our source material who immerses himself in the Bible and starts living by its clear rules. God works through us despite ourselves, and his word powerfully changes minds and lives when it's studied and obeyed.
It's not just head knowledge.
Right. It underscores that our identity as God's chosen people should be a beacon, reflecting his holiness, his moral correctness to the world. Not conforming to the world or compromising on his clear instructions. This story isn't about promoting legalism. It's about the integral, vital connection between genuine faith and outward obedience as the demonstration of a surrendered heart. 6. Practical applications and enduring lessons for your journey.
Okay, this whole deep dive into the burning bush, Moses' call, his resistance, even that startling circumcision story, it really drives home how much God invests in preparing us, calling us, equipping us, often in the most unexpected, counterintuitive ways.
Absolutely. His ways are not our ways.
So let's try to crystallize this. What are some of the most crucial practical lessons you want our listener to take away from Moses' extraordinary experience? Lessons they can actually apply to their own lives, starting today.
Okay, first, think about those quiet, often overlooked years Moses spent in the desert. That teaches us an invaluable lesson about our duties in life, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, before his huge leadership role, he was, a humble family man. He diligently cared for sheep, and incredibly, he wrote foundational biblical books under God's inspiration during that time.
So the mundane matters.
Exactly. It shows that fulfilling our humble daily responsibilities, no matter how ordinary or unglamorous they seem, can be precisely where God prepares and uses us. Our work, whatever it is.
Raising kids, doing our job well.
Caring for others, diligently performing our daily tasks, simply cultivating our character. It can and should be faithfully done as unto God because it's in those quiet, consistent efforts that character is formed and divine insights are often received. God uses the mundane to prepare us for the monumental.
That's encouraging. It also seems to speak volumes about how we should approach God's calls, right? Especially when they feel overwhelming or when our first instinct is to make excuses, just like Moses.
Oh, absolutely.
How should this story help us learn to trust that God can actually enable us to do what he calls us to do? Because Moses really struggled with that.
He really did. And his reasonable excuses, who am I? They won't believe me. I can't speak well. They were perfectly human, very relatable expressions of doubt, but at their core, they revealed a deep-seated lack of trust in God's ability to enable him, to qualify him, to go with him.
So the lesson for us.
The profound lesson for you, the listener, is to learn to trust implicitly that God can and will enable you to do whatever he calls you to do. Remember that phrase. His biddings are enablings.
I like that. Biddings are enablings.
When God says, I will be with you, it's an all-encompassing, self-sufficient promise. It covers every perceived weakness, every potential obstacle. Don't fixate on your weaknesses, your perceived incapacities, your past failures. Instead, fix your gaze on his infinite promises. They are far more powerful than any excuse or doubt you can conjure.
So count on him implicitly.
Yes, because his strength is made perfect in your weakness. That's the paradox.
Okay. And one last thing, connecting back to Moses writing Genesis in the wilderness. For anyone maybe grappling with the authority of biblical texts, especially Genesis, what does Moses' authorship under divine inspiration emphasize about its importance, its historicity, and why is that so crucial?
Right. Moses' authorship of Genesis, received under direct divine inspiration while he was shepherding in Midian, is absolutely crucial. It's foundational for understanding all of sacred history and the entire plan of salvation.
It sets the stage.
Completely. It lays out the cosmic conflict, creation itself, the fall of humanity, the flood, God's initial covenant promises through the patriarchs. It establishes the very nature of God, humanity's sin, and redemption.
So attempts to undermine it.
We have to fight diligently against every attempt to weaken its authority, especially, as you noted, by denying the historicity of particularly those first 11 chapters.
Why is denying the history so problematic?
Because if you suggest those historical accounts, creation, Adam and Eve, the fall, the flood, Babel, are just myths or allegories, you undermine the entire narrative of God's interaction with humanity and his plan of redemption. So much of the later biblical narrative becomes inexplicable or irrelevant.
Like Paul talking about Adam.
Exactly. If there was no historical Adam, what does Paul mean by the last Adam, Jesus? If there is no literal fall into sin, why the desperate need for a redeemer? Genesis provides the bedrock upon which all other biblical truths are built. Its historicity matters profoundly.
Okay. So to bring it all together then for you, the listener, as you reflect on this powerful deep dive, the burning bush, Moses' journey, what's the core overarching message you should carry forward?
I think the core message is this. When God calls you to a specific task, no matter how grand or how humble it seems, how impossible it feels, he also simultaneously equips and enables you to accomplish it.
Calling and empowering go together.
Hand in hand, they're two sides of the same divine coin. You don't need to worry if the work seems enormous or far beyond your current abilities, because God is in charge. His strength truly is made perfect in your weakness.
And his goal isn't just getting the job done.
No. His most important objective, it seems, is not just the accomplishment of the task itself, but creating a meaningful, intimate, trusting relationship with you. He is a personal God, Yahweh, who truly sees, hears, and knows your sorrows.
So the takeaway action.
Listen to his promises. Trust him implicitly. And surrender unreservedly to his commands, even the ones that feel small or inconvenient, like the circumcision command from Moses. Because God transforms character. He turns perceived weaknesses into strengths, and he can even turn curses into blessings for those who trust him fully and obey.
Outro. Wow. What a journey we've been on today, really delving into the burning bush and discovering layers of meaning and practical application for our lives that honestly go far beyond just a simple Sunday school story.
It's incredibly rich, isn't it?
From Moses' wilderness university and that whole unlearning of self-reliance to the intimate revelation of God's eternal name, I am, and even that startling life or death lesson about obedience and the circumcision incident, it's abundantly clear that God's calls are transformative.
They really are.
They challenge us, don't they, to step beyond our perceived limitations and trust completely in his limitless power and his perfect, though often surprising, timing.
Indeed. And you've seen how God patiently refutes excuses, provides tangible assurances through miraculous signs, and even in his righteous anger offers gracious solutions to our very human reluctance and distrust.
Even when he's angry, he makes a way.
The experience of Moses teaches us that true strength comes not from self-reliance, not from our impressive resumes or past accomplishments, but from surrendering fully to the one who made our mouths, who sees our afflictions and who is always ready to fulfill his promises for those who simply trust and obey. His faithfulness truly does outweigh our fears.
So here's a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to maybe ponder as you go about your day. If God's holy presence transformed a humble desert bush into holy ground, and patiently transformed an impetuous Egyptian prince, full of himself, into the meekest man on earth, what might he do with your life?
Good question.
If you stopped making excuses, maybe, and fully embraced his call, trusting his power to work through your perceived weaknesses, what unexpected, maybe even history-making work might he be preparing you for right now in your quiet daily duties that seem entirely unseen by the world?
Something to think about.
Definitely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking those aha moments that make you truly well-informed.